Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Real Talk, our campus weekly video series where we discuss relationships, empathy, advocacy, and life. All of our episodes are pre-recorded and released every Tuesday at 5 p.m. on our IGTV and Facebook. So today's episode, we're going to be discussing intimacy after experiencing an assault or experiencing abuse in a relationship or with another person. It doesn't have to be in a dating relationship, any type of abuse or trauma. And when we talk about intimacy, that can mean a lot of different things for people. So I think automatically we were even going into this episode thinking about like physical or sexual intimacy, particularly after experiencing a sexual assault. But it could also look like emotional intimacy, like how to feel safe around someone, emotionally safe, feeling like you can discuss your feelings with someone safely, or other areas in that relationship that were or maybe made uncomfortable because of the assault or abuse. And now it's navigating how to feel comfortable in those spaces again.
Yeah. And unlearning, I think, the negative expectations that you might have come to, especially in maybe an abusive relationship or something, like you were saying, when you disclose feelings or if you're upset with something, victims or survivors may often like expect that they're going to be belittled or, like, oh my God, you're so stupid, or you're crazy for having that feeling, or, your feelings are hurt, but it's really your fault kind of a thing. Right. Now, having that conversation of like, I'm upset or you've hurt my feelings in a healthy relationship can be weird, but it's that almost the emotional intimacy piece, like trusting that you can be vulnerable with this person.
Yeah, because it's not easy in any new relationship to kind of feel that out anyway, like regardless of a past history of trauma, to figure out like, ooh, when can I share all these weird thoughts in my head, or when can I share like what I'm feeling or what I'm going through. But particularly for someone who's experienced trauma, that's another layer of like, we've talked about the word disclosure a lot, of sharing openly past experiences. And we've done an episode kind of on how to receive that disclosure a little bit. But it can be really tricky to figure out in whether it's a new dating relationship or a hookup, someone that you're casually seeing. It can feel really scary or overwhelming to have that conversation, or to feel like you may want to have that conversation with this person to inform, how to interact with them. Like maybe it's because of PDA, like you're not used to having public displays of affection and it feels uncomfortable, or there are certain touches. And that's why the difference between physical intimacy and sexual intimacy, physical can literally just be, it can be a hug, it can be a touch on the shoulder, it can be holding the hand, or, brushing an arm. Like it doesn't have to be the actual like intimacy in bed, type of intimacy that we might think of immediately. So that can be a really challenging conversation for people who have experienced abuse or trauma, of like, how do I explain to this person who I don't, or I hope isn't intending any harm, but by touching me in that way, it triggers me or brings me back to a place of feeling unsafe. And those conversations are really hard to even like prepare themselves for, let alone to have, and then worry about the response.
And I think too, even before that, there's this fear of, not even fear, but like almost not recognizing it, like when you are triggered because the way somebody holds your hand, or if they put their hand on your shoulder, or whatever it might be, like your body remembers sometimes, like that trauma that happened to you before you can even process it like mentally. Your body might just be like, nope, like we don't want this, we don't like this. Having to process that, and like, what are these weird negative like anxious feelings that I'm experiencing when I'm in a physical space with this person who I like and I have feelings for. It can be incredibly confusing to just be sitting with that. And I think it's important to remember that like, that's normal. It's common. Like when you've experienced abuse or assault, like your boundary was violated, your control was taken away, in whatever way that looked like or felt like for you. It's unique for every person, but it can be scary to like be vulnerable with someone else again. And like, you may have to remind yourself like, oh no, this is not that person and I'm safe here with them. And it can be maybe okay when they want to hold my hand in public, or whatever that might be like.
Yeah. And it made me think about too how people tend to judge survivors no matter what they're doing. Like if they do feel comfortable engaging in sexual activity like very shortly after their assault, or they do jump into a new relationship after experiencing abuse or trauma, people will judge because they think like, oh, well, if you were really assaulted, you shouldn't even want sex. And it's like, that's not fair. Like, let's not have that narrative, because it's their body. Like, and like you were just saying, their control was already taken away. So if that is their way of trying to regain control again, that's a very normal and valid response to trauma. But also, like, people are allowed to enjoy sex even if they've experienced trauma. Like, let's not take that away from them, you know. Like, we shouldn't have to push this narrative of like, well, because you experienced this horrible thing, you should hate sex for the rest of your life. Like, we want them to get to a place where they can feel comfortable with any type of sexual intimacy, whether, you know, that's oral sex, like, you know, whatever it looks like, you know, that they can get to a place that feels safe for them, in whatever level of like intimacy they're looking for, but not judging if someone does feel comfortable with that right away, or, you know, or is into certain sexual activities that may seem or appear, again, to be like the ones that we would automatically judge of, like, you know, rougher sex, right? Or like using toys or whatever that like someone might think of and use, again, judgment of like, well, if you were traumatized, like, you shouldn't be into those things. So I think it's just really important too to like recognize the a lot of survivors may have that conflicting thought as well with themselves of like, should I be enjoying sex right now? Should I even want this right now because of what happened to me? And so if you're experiencing those thoughts, like, you're not alone, and that's a normal thought process to have, but also like, it's your body. So do whatever feels okay for you and safe for you, obviously.
Right. And I think it's important. We've talked about it before. Like, the reason we started Real Talk is because we're friends and we have these conversations all day long. And like, we rely on each other as friends to talk about like dating and relationships and just life. And I think if you're talking to your friends about like that you're hooking up with people, or you're ready to like have sex with people, and you find that they are kind of negating your experience or questioning your experience, like, screw that, like, they're wrong. You have every right to do whatever it is that feels right for you, or to try to explore what might feel right. I think a lot of times survivors may try to like push themselves maybe before they're ready, because, oh, it's been a year or it's been 6 months, I should be able to just like have sex like I used to before the assault. And that can be scary. It can be tough to navigate. And like, of course you have a right to explore and try and see what feels right. But if your body, if your heart, if your mind is telling you like, this hurts, or this makes me sad, or it feels too soon, and I'm not excited about this, you don't have to be anywhere by a certain point in time. You don't have to be ready to have sex again like you used to. Like, it was a real thing what happened to you. It was valid. It was probably scary. It probably was confusing. And it can take time to unpack that and be ready to be sexually intimate with another person again. Maybe even more so if they don't know what's happened, right? If you're in a relationship or in a space with someone where you feel comfortable disclosing and saying like, hey, when we do this, or when you try to do that, like, it feels triggering for me because of an experience that I had. Like, you don't have to justify what happened, but I know that sometimes it can feel, whatever we're talking about, honesty sometimes can just feel better to be like open if you really trust that person, and then you can feel safer like moving forward in whatever it is that you want to try to engage in, and supported like when somebody's trying to help you through that experience.
Totally. And I'm really glad you brought up the timeline, because I think that is so true of like feeling like there has to be some kind of finish line of like, okay, I've gone to counseling, or, you know, I've worked on my healing and I should be in a place where I can do these things. But it's also recognizing that maybe you did get to a place where you felt comfortable engaging in some activity, and then months later or 2 years later or 6 years later, you get triggered again while being intimate, whether again emotionally, physically, sexually, and you're like, how am I back here again? Like, I did all the work, I was able to have, you know, consensual, enjoyable sex or whatever, and that was years ago. Why am I, you know, back in this place again? And I think it's important to be like compassionate with yourself, that like there's no timeline in when it's like, okay, now I'm better in general, you know, like we talk about, you know, like healing as not linear all the time, but particularly I think with intimacy, that can feel like, you know, okay, I have to reach this point where I'm going to just always from now on be okay with touch or sex or whatever, or vulnerability. And it's okay if you're not. It's okay if the trauma happened 8 years ago and you feel like you're in a good place, but then something happens and it feels like you're taking a step backwards. Like, that's normal to feel that way, but just be patient with yourself and compassionate. Like you were saying, the body holds those memories, the body holds that trauma in ways that we may not even be, you know, aware of. And so it's really natural sometimes for the body to react, sometimes even before the mind does. And even if you're in like a loving, healthy relationship, you know, or consensual experience, it may not take away from that loving, you know, healthy relationship or that consensual experience. It can just be a reminder. Sometimes we've talked about this in previous episodes of like, sometimes it's just a smell, like a, you know, perfume or cologne, or like a certain position, especially if we're talking about assault. Like, it might be a certain sexual position that triggers you and you may not realize it until you're in it. It could be like the, you know, darkness or lightness of the room. Like, there's so many different things that you may not even realize can just impact you in that moment. And particularly if you are in a healthy, loving relationship or in a consensual experience, when something like that happens, I think going off of what you were just saying before of like, if you feel safe communicating it in that moment, that might feel really scary, but it also can feel empowering to be able to change the course of what's occurring in that moment for you, right? Like, not that it's hopefully going to become non-consensual, but that it may give you a little bit back of that power that was taken away to be able to say, I don't feel good right now, you know, or I need to stop right now. And if you have that respectful person in front of you, hopefully they will be able to listen and really hear you in that.
I love that you brought that up, because I think what, like exactly what you said, that can be empowering to remind yourself that like the norm is that you will be and should be respected when you say, nope, like this is too much, or this, I don't feel good right now, or whatever. And we hope that like anyone would hear that and stop, obviously. And so if you're with someone that you trust and you give yourself the opportunity to say that, I think that can be a huge step in healing, right? Like, and not in a linear way of like, you have to check this box and do this thing, like, but it's just a really empowering experience. And I think like having it be a goal for yourself of like, one day I want to be able to have sex again and not be triggered in the middle of it, great. But I think one day is a little safer than like, by next month I'm going to be able to do this.
Exactly.
Whatever if you're talking about weight loss, or if you're talking about getting a new job or passing an exam, like things happen. Sometimes we can't assign a time to them. And like, especially with trauma is so fun and complex, and like it pops up when we're not expecting it to. And I think to try to think that we're always going to have like this control and like never feel triggered again, like we can hope that, but like when and if you do, taking a beat, taking a breath, and like just reminding yourself that it is normal that you might feel that way, or that you might react differently to intimacy, whether it's emotional intimacy or physical or sexual intimacy after abuse or assault, can give you the time to explore, okay, what do I need to feel safe doing this? Whether it's internally, like with yourself, with a counselor, with your partner, you know, kind of searching for like, what am I looking for by doing this? What am I hoping to receive? And then finding the way to communicate that is all fair.
Yeah. And I think that's so true for relationships too. Like, I know we talked a lot about assault, and I think each of these types of trauma that we've discussed today, like whether it's sexual assault or an abusive relationship, and again, whether that's a physically abusive, emotionally, you know, psychologically, etc. For someone maybe who's entering a new relationship after, I don't want to say exiting their abusive, but like not being in the abusive relationship anymore, that can feel really scary to trust someone again. But also like trusting yourself, trusting your gut, paying attention to red flags, you know, and it's natural to have like walls up and be guarded kind of going into that new relationship, but also, I don't know, giving yourself permission to be loved, like giving yourself permission to be in a relationship that you are deserving of, you know, not the abusive relationship, right? That was kind of the fake love, or the love that was masked with all of this abuse, or vice versa. But knowing that you are deserving of all of these things, that, you know, respect and love and all like trust and safety, emotional, physical, sexual safety in that relationship. So, you know, lean on your support systems if you're kind of entering that new relationship and that emotional intimacy feels scary for you, or, you know, you're kind of looking for ways to put more walls up to try to protect yourself. Talk to us about, you know, like process it with us, process it with your friends or people in your life that you trust, to find new ways to give yourself that permission, if that makes sense.
I'm reminded of a conversation that you and I had a while ago where you were talking about like how to feel safe in a new relationship. We were having that kind of conversation, and you had talked about like pay attention to the green flags. Like after you've been through something, it's likely to say, oh, well, this is a sign, or this is reminding me of that person, and like I don't know about this, or I'm scared to be vulnerable. And you had shared like something that was just so helpful for me, and I felt like changed a viewpoint that I had, was kind of like notice all of the times that you can trust them. Notice all of the times when they do show up and do what they say they're going to do, and when they respect you, and when they make you feel safe, right? And use that to kind of help you balance when you're feeling like anxious or nervous. Because sometimes as someone who has been through abuse or assault may feel like triggered by something that their partner's not doing. Like sometimes you might get in your head and be like, well, this could be that, and this might be this worst sign.
Or this reminds me of my ex who was horrible.
Right.
And we start comparing and holding in our head like, well, they must be just like them then. And
right. And it's using the actual facts, if that's what we want to call them, but paying attention to the green flags too, of like, oh no, but like when I said this one time, they responded to me and they respected my feelings. Or when I tried this, they really cared about me, and just using that as a reminder, like as you're trying to build maybe a new relationship with someone, whether it's, you know, a one night stand or a new like future relationship that you're going to like be in for a bit, like paying attention to the good stuff too can help. Sometimes we start from a place of like, this is just going to be too scary and too much for me. So that was a cool thought, and I hope I made sense in the way that I relayed that.
Yeah, 100%. I forgot. I mean, I remember that conversation, but I forgot how I said it. So thank you for rephrasing my own thoughts, because I couldn't come to it in my own head today. But yeah, that's exactly what I think is so challenging. And like in your own time, figure out what feels okay for you. Maybe you're not ready to be in a new relationship yet, and that's okay. Like take your time in figuring that out, but know that you are deserving of all those things. And there are people out there who will give those things to you, right? It's not everybody is abusive. Not everybody is violent. Not everybody is, you know, harmful.
Yeah.
So you will find that relationship, you will find that experience, whether it's a sexual experience or whatever, that feels good. Which is like, I love how you said earlier, like that is the norm, like, and it should be the norm. So like pay attention to those good things and notice how you feel when those things happen. Like really tap into that gut instinct of like, oh, this feels safe, or this feels comfortable, or this feels open, or whatever kind of comes to mind. Like tap into that. And you'll know, especially if you've experienced trauma, deep down, if you give yourself the moment to reflect or like tap into that, you'll know the difference between what feels right and okay and what feels off.
Right.
You know, there's a gut thing for a reason, and it'll tell you. So like, listen to your gut, trust yourself. And if you're ever in doubt, you have support, you know, from us and hopefully other people in your life that can help you kind of sort that out or talk it out in some way.
Totally. I think that's so true. Like, we help people at the Women's Center who are in all stages of healing, whether the
Right.
thing happened yesterday or 6 years ago or 25 years ago.
Right.
It's valid to still talk about this, and it shows up in all different ways. And we're people who like to connect with others. So it's
Yeah.
fair that maybe trauma would impact the way you show up in a relationship. And you're entitled to be able to process that with someone who can give you that safe, comforting environment. And I think we spent a lot of time today, obviously that was the intention of the episode, of talking about kind of how to be intimate again in all these different ways after abuse or assault, and like if that's a struggle, and how you can notice that maybe that's happening. I just want to say that like that's not like a qualifier to like validate like your abuse or assault, that like, oh, if this was actually assault, I would have a really hard time having sex or like entering in a new relationship. That's not true. If you can do it and you're able to safely kind of and feel good about like moving into this new relationship after trauma has happened, amazing. That's so cool.
Right.
Like,
We're proud of you. We're really proud of you. Yeah.
It is not like oh, well, if this really was that, then I would be struggling.
Yes. I'm so
It's
glad you said that.
not the thing that, you know, shows up for everyone. Trauma is different for every single person. These situations are unique for every person because people are unique and individual. So your experience may be totally different than what we've talked about today, and you might not connect with it, or you might totally connect with it. And that's cool.
And we'll never judge what you are going through, like whether it's the fears, concerns, triggers, or it's the opposite, like we were saying earlier, like maybe you are, you know, into certain things that other people would look at and say, I can't believe you would want to do that or whatever. Like, we're never going to judge anything that you bring to us. So just know that we are a safe place for you. And hopefully you have a safe place, you know, outside of us too, with your friends or family or loved ones, but you have us at the very least. We care about you, and we know that this is really hard. So for some people, like you said, it may be a totally different journey for others, and that's completely fair and completely valid. So wherever you are at in that kind of,
Yeah.
I feel like we're talking like bachelorette lingo of like wherever you're at in your journey, but wherever you are at in your healing and your journey, like of where you are, just know that we're here to support you every step of the way.
That's awesome. And also, I want to give our hotline number. So our 24-hour confidential hotline is 203-731-5204. You can call that to get connected to a counselor. You can call it to process what we talked about today. If you're feeling triggered and feel like calling a counselor in that moment would be a helpful thing for you, you can do that too. Confidential, you can remain anonymous, and it's 24 hours. So 203-731-5204. If you have any thoughts or questions or reactions to what we talked about today, you can reach out to us via email or phone. And remember that these videos are put on Instagram, our main Women's Center Facebook, and then are available on YouTube as well. But stay tuned for next week's episode. Share this with a friend. Let us know if you have thoughts, questions, anything like that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for listening.